Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ken Moore, the Frederick P. Rose Curator in charge of musical instruments here at the Metropolitan Museum and Curator of the Sacred Lute, the Art of Ostad Elahi. Welcome to an extraordinary event today, and I'll just say a few words that in many cultures from ancient times until today, music is used as a means of communication with a higher power, either through loud, ecstatic, kind of Dionysian methods or a quieter approach like that of Ostad Elahi. Today, we celebrate that legacy of Ostad Elahi with a wonderful program that I'm sure you are going to enjoy. But first, can I remind you to take your telephone out of your pocket and turn it off so that everybody can enjoy this program. Our speaker today, though I'm sure that he's not aware of it, helped shape the exhibition. Jean During's many books on Persian music and musical instruments helped set the standards in the field, and his book, The Spirit of Sounds, The Unique Art of Ostad Elahi, 1895 to 1974, served as the main source and inspiration for the exhibition. Professor During was born in France, and after receiving his master's in philosophy, moved to Iran in 1971, where for the next 10 years he acquainted himself with Iranian philosophy at the Academy of Philosophy in Tehran. During this time, he studied the tar and setar, two important instruments from Iran, and frequented some of the greatest Iranian masters of traditional music. In 2003, he returned to Iran for 2 years and then expanded his studies by spending 4 years in Uzbekistan as scientific attaché. As the director of research at the French National Center for Scientific Research in Ethnomusicologie in Paris, his fieldwork covers the maqam traditions of Iran, including Kurdish spiritual genres, music from Azerbaijan, and the peoples of Central Asia. His studies included not only musical forms, but also the Sufi and shamanic rituals, cultural traditions, and the philosophies related to those musical practices. He has written 13 books on music and culture in Inner Asia, more than 100 articles in specialized reviews and encyclopedia, and released around 50 CDs with accompanying scholarly notes. Variously, his books have been translated into English, Persian, and Italian. Please help me greet Dr. Jean During.
Thank you, Ken. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The convergence of our remarkable musical competence and a deep and rigorous spiritual practice is rare in the history of music. There are not many examples of prodigious musicians who were at the same time highly spiritual persons and deep thinkers. Concerning Ostad Elahi, we can rely on several sources: the transcription of his oral teachings and personal experience, his writings, hours of musical recordings, and a wealth of first-hand testimonials. Altogether, these documents bear witness to an exceptional musical practice by a man who himself was, in every respect, exceptional. Ostad said that during his life, there are two things on which my time was well spent: the tanbūr and spiritual practice. From his early childhood and throughout all his life, he practiced his art, whether for himself or for others, exclusively as a means of connecting to the divine plane in total detachment for all earthly interest. Beyond his teaching, his conduct provides a living example of his spiritual principle down to the last details. By analogy, there is a reason to think that his music must also be a reflection of his wisdom, his ethics, and the depth of his thought. In listening to, it is possible to draw beneficial effects that go beyond mere aesthetic pleasure. This is what I'll try to demonstrate in this brief talk. Regarding his spiritual quest, he said, "I have not imitated anyone. Everything is the result of my own discoveries and my own experience." This statement holds true also for his music. As a child prodigy, he didn't need lessons to play the tanbūr. In the space surrounding the village where he spent his first 25 years, he just grasped whatever he could hear, sacred as well as secular tunes, religious songs accompanied by his father's tanbūr, dance tune played on wind instruments, the horse's gallop, and the camel bells of a caravan. Thus, he assimilated the whole repertoire of songs, melodies, and even dance steps available in his culture. He adapted all this melody to his lute thanks to a transcendent technique that he had already elaborated during his childhood. The echoes of this particular soundscape is often noticeable in his playing. Thus, Ostad Elahi transcended the local sacred lore of the tanbūr, bringing personal elements along in its ascent. In other words, he enriched and refined the vernacular idiom of the tanbūr, originally limited to a small community, and turned it into a language of the soul, open to an unlimited space of mutual understanding. This artistic achievement is exactly parallel to Ostad's spiritual and philosophical journey. His teaching is rooted in a very specific mystical tradition, but through practice, experience, and systematic research, Ostad managed to extract a quintessential doctrine bearing a universal message. Another aspect of his musical approach that is worth mentioning is its singularity. One can hardly find similar case of purely devotional or spiritual music, which is altogether highly artistic, creatively performed and improvised on one single instrument, extending over a broad range of affects and response, from nostalgia and crying to exhilaration and dancing. In his spiritual quest, too, Ostad eludes the traditional models. An accomplished mystic, he chose to renounce the renunciation of the world, instead deciding to live in society and to become a magistrate. Let's review the outline of his biography. 1895. He was born in a village in East Kurdistan in a profound spiritual milieu. His father, Haj Nematullah, devoted himself entirely to the spiritual path along with his son and wife. At the age of 9, he started a cycle of ascetic retreats that lasted 12 consecutive years. At the age of 26, he left his native village and settled in Tehran. Recalling his state of mind when the picture of the top was taken, he says, "I was in an angelic world, in a state of constant asceticism." During his work as a civil servant, he maintained the same rigorous spiritual practice. According to him, one should not withdraw from society and live in retreat and prayer like mystics of the past. Rather, one should live in society while remaining attentive to the source. At the age of 35, he cut his long hair and dressed in a Western-style business suit. A few few years later, he received his jurisprudence degree and began a judicial career, during which he lived in several cities of Iran. At the age of 62, he retired and devoted his time to spiritual research, authorships, and teaching. Beginning in 1960, in response to the request of close relatives and friends, he held regular meetings that progressively attracted many people of various backgrounds. However, he always sought to escape any form of celebrity, both as a spiritual figure and as a master musician. It is during this period that his intimate tanbūr playing was recorded, totaling some 40 hours. Yet it was 20 years after his departure that the CD publication of these archives began. But let's first consider his conception and definition of music. From there, we'll be in a better position to examine the conditions in which he actually practiced it. In Professor Bahram Elahi's writing, we find some keys for understanding Ostad's conception that has been shared for millennia by the wise and enlightened ones in many cultures. So, music exists at all levels of creation in diverse forms. We possess both a physical ear and a spiritual ear, that is, a special sense that belongs to the soul. Those who are spiritually awakened can hear something of the sounds and voice of the metaphysical world. Certain earthly melodies are in harmony with celestial sounds. Originally, he says, music was created to arouse spiritual emotion. When used with a spiritual aim, music connects us to the soul, and our soul connects us to the divine. Just as all souls do not have the same innate capacity to perceive these echoes of celestial sounds, not all music and instruments have the same ability to reflect something of those celestial sounds. Yet a spiritual music doesn't function by itself. It must also be properly interpreted in order to yield its full impact. According to Ostad, music shouldn't be appreciated solely for its formal aspect. We should seek to hear its celestial resonance and consider it as a means of spiritual communication, and not as an end in itself. Nevertheless, his music is complete. It meets high aesthetic standards, it is sophisticated, creative, and requires many years of practice and maturation. The difference between a merely artistic performance and a spiritual performance turns on the personality of the musician, his intention, his personal ethics, the spirit in which he performs, his capacity to connect himself to a transcendent source, and the type of communication he established with the audience. When playing for a small circle, Ostad sometimes led the attendees to join in sing or even in dance. The CDs of his published recordings contain some examples of such circumstances. We find, for instance, a sequence of rare intensity at the end of which Ostad addresses his intimate circle in this term: had we spent 10 years in prayers and litanies, perhaps it would not have had as great an effect as the unity of heart with which we gather to approach God in one voice. It is worth noting that Ostad did not perform only for his relative. All sorts of people would come to visit him, among them artists and scholars, and he never refused to take up his tanbūr or another of his lute and play for them. Many people have testified to the powerful, amazing, and lasting effect they felt on hearing him playing. According to Ostad, the intention that characterized a spiritual music practice, active or receptive, is that of a prayer carried out with humility and sincerity, with the aim of drawing closer to God and attracting his contentment and mercy. On this basis, sacred music, songs, and words spread the spiritual emotion for which they were conceived. A prayer filled with emotion and fervor reaches the heaven and even further when it is collective. Why did this music have such a deep impact? Since music is originally a divine creation, the musician and the listener must have the dignity to draw closer to the source. To this end, they must purify their intention and develop moral traits. Now we are aware that Ostad spent his whole life perfecting his inner self and implementing high ethical standards. Besides his creative genius, the deep effect of his music lies in his human quality and noble character trait, as well as the silent feature of his ethics. These qualities are reflected in his music if one carefully listens. Briefly stated, one of the secrets of this music is that it is devoid of any trace of the ego. But let's review some examples of this quality. We may say that the very choice of the instrument, the tanbūr, tells us something about the sobriety, the discretion and concentration that characterized his behavior. Indeed, the tanbūr itself is a sober, almost ascetic instrument. Its sonority is hardly sensual, shimmering, or seductive. It can be very sharp, like a laser. However, in Ostad's hands, this small instrument with a delicate sound turned into a medium of channeling an incredibly powerful energy. Yehudi Menuhin, the famous violinist and conductor, had the opportunity to meet Ostad. He confessed to being highly impressed by his tanbūr playing. Years later, in a discussion, he stated that the effect unleashed by Ostad Lute could not be matched by the symphonic orchestra he conducted. Speaking about the effect of attentive listening, it is worth mentioning another parallel between music and spirituality. The need for constant attention is one of the pillars of Ostad's method. He says the path of spiritual perfection can be summed up in 2 points: being attentive to the source and doing good to others. His music was a way to do good, not only for those around him, but also for a very large audience thanks to the recording that he left us. The melody played and developed by Ostad are the audible actualization of his discipline of concentration, constant attention to the source, to the point of unicity. Some of the tunes he revived from the Kurdish tradition are just jingles whose mere repetition has no special effect or soon becomes boring. By delving deeply into this repetitive formula, by implementing his distinctive fingering technique, by addition of melodic and rhythmic ornamentation and submitting the melodic pattern to continuous variation, Ostad managed to unleash their unsuspected power. To produce masterpieces from simple motif, ritornello, is one facet of his prodigious creativity. moral traits apparent in Ostad's character and conduct in life are also reflected in his tanbūr. For instance, firmness in the sonority, rigor in the rhythm and pulse, precision in the ornamentation, dignity in the performer's overall attitude, audacity in the modulation, the dissonance, the unexpected breaks and transition, generosity apparent from the intensity of the musical flow, contained emotion overflowing into passion when he sings for the beloved. Some of these moral qualities overlap what we may be described as a disposition of an intellectual nature, like an independent mind coupled with a powerful creativity. At this point, a question arises: why would Ostad play music instead of teaching, giving advice, or responding to questions? The answer I've reached is that most of us possess a rare, dense psychological layer that muffles our receptivity to spiritual truth. In fact, at first, many people came to him for his music much more than for his teachings. For those who listened to Ostad's music in addition to attending his teaching, it facilitated the comprehension of his word. For those who are involved in a discipline of self-improvement, such music acts like a stimulant that boosts one's motivation. For some listeners, the stimulation was so strong that it triggered extraordinary states of elation, exhilaration, and excitement that brought them to let go and sometimes relinquish control altogether. Yet most often, trance-like or ecstatic state induced by acoustical flow still have a psychological substratum. By contrast, the kind of connection achieved by direct attention to the source, which is ultimately the aim of a spiritual music, taps in the soul itself, which is, in this case, benefits from a supernatural grace. In Ostad's music, this grace manifested itself in various ways. For almost every listener, it had a therapeutic effect. It cured the soul and therefore had a positive impact on the mood, the psyche, and even on health. One evening, a man who was in a state of profound depression came knocking on Ostad's door. He sat in a corner while Ostad played the tanbūr. Without even speaking to him, his music healed the man's suffering. Ostad's son, Dr. Art of Elahi, provides the following account. I quote him: "His music had an extraordinary impact, making you forget your sorrow, your problem, everything. It was like a therapeutic wave that washed over you, removing any impurity, any negative or parasite thought. After this, you were no longer the same. Materiality had lost its luster." That was Ostad Elahi's tanbūr. It would change your perspective on things. After listening to Ostad, a famous master of Persian music, Musa Ma'rufi, related his experience in a published article. "I heard playing a great spiritual man who had mastered the art of the tanbūr to perfection. I was shaken and overwhelmed to such an extent that I felt that I no longer belonged to this world. The most astonishing part is that I remained drunken and aloof for a few days, no longer aware of the material world." Having said that, we must keep in mind that practicing and listening to music doesn't directly induce progress along the path of self-knowledge. The function of music is to help us harness an energy that motivates us to practice ethical and divine principles, to develop moral qualities and to control the impulse of the ego. Obviously, much of the effect of this music came from Ostad's own charisma, from the mere impact of his presence. However, if he allowed people to record some of his private performances, it was because, in his wisdom, he knew that this art would continue to live and exert its effect by itself in two ways: for those who would listen one day to his recording, and for the tambour player who would tap into this treasure in order to pursue the art of the sacred lute. Here again, I'm referring to long discussion I had with Ostad's son, Dr. Art of Elahi, the legatee of the art of the tanbūr, which he learned for 15 years under his father's direction and practiced in the same spirit. According to him, in order to listen properly to Ostad Elahi, several conditions must be met. One must refrain from making any comparison. It is not comparable to other musical traditions, even spiritual or sacred ones. One must bear in mind that it has a different origin and objective than other music. It doesn't stem from the willingness to display one's art or perform someone else's work. It's more comparable to a form of devotion. And as with any devotion, humility is a prerequisite. Becoming familiar with Ostad's personal ethic, personality, and philosophy improves one's receptivity to his music. This is the purpose of this lecture, actually. Music may be an integral experience. It may affect the listener as a whole, but it is originally created for the soul. And when the soul is deeply moved, so too are the physical and the psychological layers. To conclude, I'd like to take this opportunity to give a few practical tips for beginners in this music. It is available to beginning with the pieces that one finds appealing. Otherwise, one's attention will soon diminish. Listen it to several times until one wishes to listen to something else. Then one will discover another piece, and things will follow from there. We say that this music has therapeutic virtues for the soul. So like any medicine, one may not exceed the prescribed dose. Of course, there is no risk of overdose, but one should bear in mind that whenever Ostad played, he never went over a certain length of time, and rarely more than 20 minutes. And since it's already 20 minutes I have been speaking, it's now time to wrap up and let the music speak by itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. I don't think we would ever overdose on your lectures. You have a lot to tell us and a lot of wisdom, and I thank you so much for coming and being a part of this today. Essential to the planning and organization of the Sacred Lute has been the involvement of the Noor Foundation, which gave us entree to the Elahi family, to the documentary resources, to their Parisian counterparts, and very importantly, the financial means to produce the wonderful exhibition. Representing the Noor Foundation is Richard Ross, their program director, who will introduce the next feature on the program today. Richard.
Thank you very much, Ken. It's truly been a pleasure for the Foundation to collaborate with you and your department on this compelling exhibition, which by all accounts has been a phenomenal success since its opening back in August. I would also like to acknowledge the Met's Education Department and Jennifer Mock for all of her assistance in organizing this weekend's activities, including the tanbūr masterclass led by Dr. Art of Elahi yesterday, and the insightful panel discussion that followed on the neurological and therapeutic impact of Ostad Elahi's music. And for those of you who may not yet be familiar with the Noor Foundation, Briefly, we are a public charitable and non-governmental organization and special consultative status to the Department of Economic and Social Affairs at the United Nations. Inspired by the inclusive life and work of Ostad Elahi, the Foundation's primary mission is to explore expressions of meaning and commonality in human experience, with the aim of engendering a greater spirit of unity, tolerance, and understanding. This objective is achieved through a multidisciplinary and integrative approach that blends both the sciences and the humanities, enabling the Foundation to not only examine various disciplines from an objective and academic standpoint, but also to delve into their subjective and practical implications for our daily lives. As you've just heard in some detail from Jean, Ostad Elahi had a very specific conception of the role and function of music, a medium through which he could induce a broad range of profound and fundamental human emotions. Since the release of his recordings in 1995 on the occasion of the centennial of his birth, numerous musicians from various traditions in both the East and the West have been deeply moved and inspired by his music. This afternoon, we are quite fortunate to have two such musical ensembles with us. The first, the Garcia-Fons Quartet, features 4 renowned and accomplished Western musicians, all of whom are classically trained in their respective fields. But what really draws this quartet together is the extent to which each of its members has been independently and profoundly inspired and touched by Ostad's music. Thus, the pieces that you hear this afternoon are all directly inspired by Ostad Elahi's repertoire, resulting in a unique and eclectic fusion of Western and Eastern melodies. Now, as all of you, I assume, have already seen in the exhibition, Ostad Elahi selected the tanbūr as his choice instrument, making several innovative modifications both to the instrument and its playing techniques in order to elicit the celestial resonances that he sought. At the same time, he extensively studied classical Persian music with some of the leading masters of the time and was quite proficient on both the tar and the setar, 2 of the main instruments featured in classical Persian music. The second performance by the Parissa Ensemble will therefore integrate Ostad Elahi's repertoire of the tanbūr with the rich modal systems, or dastgahs, of traditional Persian music. The music will be accompanied by world-renowned vocalist Parissa, who will be singing lyrics from the poetry of Hafez and Rumi, among others. I should also mention that the tanbūr will be performed by Shahab Elahi, one of Ostad Elahi's grandsons, who has studied extensively under Dr. Shahrukh Elahi, the Grand Master and legatee of this precious musical art. So without any further ado, please help me to give a warm welcome to the Garcia-Fons Quartet.
thank you so much for coming today. That concludes our program for Sunday at the Met. I'd like to thank the truly incomparable Parissa and her ensemble, the Garcia-Fons Quartet, and our wonderful speaker today, Jean During. Thank you for coming and supporting us, and have a very good evening. Thank you. Good night.